Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Tonight, we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends, and just as terrifying, from eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed. Get ready for 5 of the most disturbing true Texas horror stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing, and by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now, let's dive into the darkness. They moved in on a Tuesday, October 12th to be exact. The sky was a hard, flat gray, the kind that looks like a ceiling painted by a tired god. The wind had already started its slow churn, a constant hum that played against the windows like something testing the locks. But Greg Morton didn't care. He stood on the porch of the old farmhouse with his arms crossed and a weak smile on his lips, convinced that this was the best decision they'd made in years. Behind him, Marla Morton stood holding a cardboard box full of kitchen utensils and trying to convince herself the place wasn't already breathing. The house was a century old, give or take. No insulation, no central air. It had a cellar that smelled like rot and bones, a barn with rusty tools nailed to the walls, and creaking floorboards that moved under your feet like they didn't want you there. But it was cheap. That was the word Greg used over and over. It's cheap, babe, practically a gift. You couldn't get a shack in Austin for this price. This is a fresh start, our own place, real land, no neighbors for miles. Marla had nodded back then. She wasn't nodding anymore. The first night, the wind didn't howl. It moaned. Long, low, rolling sounds that moved across the plains and hit the windows like whispers in an angry church. Greg slept through it. Marla didn't. By the third night, she started hearing things in the wind. Not words exactly, just shapes, the way a sentence might sound if you were underwater. She tried to ignore it, told herself it was the loneliness, the isolation, her own nerves. By the 5th night, it was definitely saying her name. Not a mistake, not a maybe. Marla! That night, she didn't sleep. Neither did Greg. He kept checking the hallway, the same hallway, over and over again. He said he was hearing boots, heavy ones, like someone pacing in slow, deliberate circles, the kind of steps a man makes when he's angry and doesn't want to say it yet. But there was no one there, until there was. It was 2:43 a.m. Greg had just come back from the hallway and was pouring himself whiskey in the kitchen when the power died. Not flickered, died all at once, and in the sudden silence, they both heard it, knocking. One knock, long and low, not at the front door, not at the back, from inside the house, behind the hallway wall. Greg stared at the plaster like it had just breathed. "There's something behind it," he whispered, "something waiting." "Don't say that," Marla snapped, her voice brittle. "It's just an old house. You said yourself it needs work." "No. Number, I heard it last night too. Something behind the wall, talking, whispering. It knows my name now too." The next day, Greg bought tools, a pry bar, a headlamp, dust mask. Marla begged him not to. "There's nothing back there, Greg. You're scaring me." But he had that look now, the obsessed one, the same look her father had when he started digging holes in their backyard after her mom died. That night, Greg tore the wallpaper off the hallway wall. Underneath, faint but visible, was a door, nailed shut, long rusted streaks around the edges like something had bled from it. There was no knob, but there was a crack, thin, just wide enough to hear through, and they both heard it. A voice. "Let me in. It's cold down here. I've been waiting so long, please, just a little mercy." It was Greg's voice, but Greg hadn't said a word. He opened it the next night. Marla woke to the sound of wood splintering. She found Greg in the hallway, sweat pouring down his face, his eyes wild. The wall was torn open and there were stairs, going down, black stairs, uneven. The air rising from them was wet and smelled of rust and vinegar and old, wet teeth. He was already halfway down when she grabbed his arm. "Don't go down there, please, Greg, please." He looked back at her and smiled. "It said I could see my dad again." Greg's father had hung himself in a motel off Interstate 49 years ago. The wind told Greg the rope was still waiting. He went down. Marla waited until sunrise. She called for him. No answer. She screamed. Nothing. She went to the edge of the steps but could see nothing but dark, pitch black, deeper than a basement should be. When the sheriff arrived, there was no staircase, no door, just smooth wall. They searched the house. No Greg, no sign of a struggle. They treated it as a missing person case. Marla moved out a week later. The house sat empty. The wind kept howling, and sometimes at 3:17 a.m., the neighbors across the plain, 5 miles away, swear they can still hear it, that low voice calling her name, begging for mercy. It was a stretch of blacktop between nowhere and hell. County Road 287, a 2-lane slit that ran crooked between Sweetwater and Abilene, cracked like an old man's lips and forgotten by the Texas Department of Transportation long before most folks alive could remember. Jimmy Dale Barton didn't even want to take that road. His daddy told him stories about it back when Jimmy was still small enough to believe men could turn into coyotes or live forever under the lake if they paid the right price. But that night, half a tank of gas, 2 Red Bulls deep, and his radio coughing static, he decided to cut through. It'd save him 20 minutes, and 20 minutes meant getting home to San Angelo before midnight. And that's when he saw the hitchhiker, just standing there, right at the bend where the road splits around a busted cattle guard and the trees start to lean a little too close, like they're listening. He had no bag, no thumb out, just a tall, starved-looking figure in a long denim coat stitched together like Frankenstein's jacket. Only the stitching wasn't thread. It looked like tendon. Jimmy slowed down, rolled his window halfway. "You all right, man?" The hitchhiker looked up slowly. His face was pale. No, not pale, gray, like smoked meat left too long on a hook. His eyes were glassy and yellowed, and his lips barely moved when he spoke. "You shouldn't stop for strangers around here." Jimmy laughed awkwardly. "You're the one standing in the damn road, man." The hitchhiker said nothing else, just stood there like a scarecrow that had wandered too far from its field. Jimmy didn't know why, but he unlocked the door, motioned him in. They rode in silence for almost 5 minutes. Then the smell hit, something between old meat and motor oil. Jimmy rolled the window down a crack and tried to breathe through his mouth. "Where are you headed?" he asked, because silence was starting to feel dangerous. The hitchhiker turned, and for the first time, Jimmy saw the stitching up close. It wasn't denim. It only looked like denim from a distance. The jacket was made from skin, tanned, dyed, pressed and sewn and shaped into some kind of patchwork horror. "I'm headed back to Sweetwater," the man finally said. Jimmy's blood ran cold. "I just came from there." The hitchhiker nodded slowly. "Then you know. You've felt it." "Felt what?" Jimmy didn't ask. He couldn't, because suddenly he remembered what his daddy told him when he was 6 years old, holding a sparkler in one hand and a hot dog in the other. back when they still went out to Sweetwater Lake to camp on 4th of July. "Don't ever swim in that lake, Jimmy," his daddy whispered, real quiet, like the trees were listening. "That water's been traded for skin." That phrase came back now like a slap. Jimmy's hands shook on the wheel. "What are you?" he asked. The hitchhiker smiled. "Not big, just enough to show teeth, far too many and too sharp. I'm what's left when the deal don't finish clean." And then he was gone. Not vanished. Just not there. Jimmy's passenger seat was empty, but the door had never opened, and the smell lingered like a curse. Jimmy didn't stop driving till he hit Abilene, but he didn't go home. He didn't call anyone. He drove straight to the police station and told them everything, like a man unburdening a soul that weighed 50 pounds too heavy. They looked at him like he was drunk, except for one officer, Sergeant Rowdy Boone, retired Army, looked like a bulldog in Kevlar, who quietly asked Jimmy to step into the back. Rowdy shut the door behind him and sat down slow, lit a cigarette even though they weren't allowed indoors anymore. "What did the jacket look like?" he asked. Jimmy told him. Rowdy nodded once. "You saw one of the Skinners." "What the hell's a Skinner?" Rowdy took a long drag, like he needed the nicotine to push the next part out of his lungs. "Sweetwater made a deal 100 years ago," he said. "Back when ranchers were dying from dust and cattle plague. They found something under that lake, a black pit. Thing didn't speak with words. It just gave 'em dreams and promises. If they fed it, it'd give 'em rain, grass, livestock, healthy boys, pretty girls. All it wanted was skin." Skin? Human, peeled, fresh, and they paid. Once a season, like a tithe, like church. Cut a drifter here, a runaway there, nobody missed 'em. But you know how cults go. One generation gives a toe, the next gives the whole damn leg. Jimmy felt sick. "You're telling me there's a cult out there skinning people for rain?" Rowdy crushed his cigarette in a rusted tin can. "I'm telling you there was. But the thing is, you don't stop a deal with something like that. You don't just move out and let the next town deal with it. They tried to quit, buried the altar, burned the old barn, even drowned the last elder in the lake, thought they were free." He leaned closer. "But it's still hungry, and it remembers." 2 nights later, Jimmy went back. Why? He didn't know. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe something whispered to him in a dream. Maybe the deal needed a replacement. He drove back down Road 287, parked where the trees bent in, and walked into the brush with nothing but a flashlight and his dad's old hunting knife. The smell hit first. Not rot. Not death. Tanning. There were frames in the trees, stretching racks, human hides nailed up like deer pelts. Some were fresh, some were children-sized. All bore a single symbol carved in their chests, a black circle with a jagged slit through the center. The pit. He heard humming, low, melodic, the sound of men in old boots and overalls, singing to something down in the dirt. Then he saw the altar, still slick, still red, still breathing, and around it, the ranchers. What was left of them? Their faces were blank, no eyes, just skin masks stretched smooth like wax paper. They turned in unison. "You came back," one said. Jimmy held the knife. "I ain't part of your cult." The man smiled, teeth stained with something dark. "You are now. The pit chose you the moment you stopped on that road." They moved toward him, and from the shadows behind stepped the hitchhiker. He wasn't wearing the skin coat anymore. He was wearing Jimmy's face. The skin trade of Sweetwater never closed. Deals like that don't end. They pass down. And if you ever find yourself between Sweetwater and Abilene, and the night feels too quiet and the trees lean in a little too close, don't stop for strangers, because something down there still remembers the price of rain, and it's always collecting. Jimmy Waller was the kind of kid who wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the grain elevator at night. He was 17, skinny, with a mop of unruly hair and hands that trembled when he thought about the future. But the job was easy money. His mom's bills didn't pay themselves, and he figured working the graveyard shift at the Amarillo grain elevator would be just another quiet way to keep out of trouble. The elevator itself was a giant beast of rusted steel and cracked concrete, its massive silos towering like silent sentinels against the flat Texas sky. It breathed in the wind and whispered with the groans of its ancient machinery. The smell was thick, dust and grain and grease, all wrapped in the sharp sting of cold metal and old sweat. Jimmy's shifts started at midnight and ended at 6 a.m. He spent hours alone in the control room, a cramped box of blinking lights and humming machines, watching monitors that tracked the endless flow of wheat being dumped into the steel giants. It was a lonely job, the kind that eats at your mind when the darkness presses in hard. That's when he started seeing her. At exactly 3:17 a.m., like clockwork, Jimmy's eyes would catch a glimpse of a figure standing near the largest silo, the one with the peeling paint and the rust stains that looked like dark tears. At first, he thought it was a trick of the moonlight or the exhaustion twisting his thoughts, but she was always there. The girl wore a white dress, faded and filthy, hanging loosely over her thin frame. Her long hair fell like a veil over a face so pale it seemed to glow faintly in the night. She never moved, never blinked, just stood, watching, waiting. Jimmy's heart would hammer in his chest whenever he saw her. The first night, curiosity wrestled with fear. He slipped out of the control room, his footsteps echoing on the metal catwalks, and walked toward her. "Hey," he called softly. Are you okay?" No answer. Then the scream came. It was a sound that shattered the night like glass breaking, raw and full of agony, ripping through the silence and striking Jimmy's ribs like a punch. It was so fierce and unnatural that rats, scores of filthy, frantic rats, burst from the cracks in the walls, scattering in all directions, their tiny claws scratching frantic rhythms on the metal floors. Jimmy stumbled backward, his breath ragged, his skin crawling, but when he blinked, the girl was gone. Just the empty stillness of the silos remained, humming quietly like nothing had happened. The next morning, Jimmy searched through old newspapers in the town library. Driven by a cold knot of dread in his stomach, he found it, buried in a yellowed clipping from 1968. Susan Lee was her name. A teenage girl, no older than Jimmy, known in town as quiet and kind but shy. The paper said she was last seen near the grain elevator with a group of older boys who had a reputation for trouble. They'd been drinking, laughing, pushing boundaries. What started as a cruel prank ended in nightmare. Those boys shoved Susan into one of the grain chutes, and the machinery was turned on. Her body was never found. Jimmy's stomach churned as he read the details. The horror of suffocation, the grinding of metal on flesh, the screams that no one heard. And every night since then, it seemed, Susan was trying to claw her way back from that dark, suffocating tomb. For the next few nights, Jimmy stayed alert, waiting for 3:17 a.m. He wanted to understand her, to help if he could. When she appeared, he tried to speak, to reach out. But every time he opened his mouth, her scream tore through the air, a sound so bone-shaking and filled with rage that Jimmy felt like his very soul was being wrenched apart. The rats came, spilling from their nests in the walls, and Jimmy learned to expect the chaos, the terror that seemed to follow her like a storm. He asked himself why. Why did she scream? Was it anger, fear, a desperate call for justice? And then there was the guilt. He felt it heavy on his chest, like a weight he couldn't shake, because he remembered something else his grandfather once told him, a warning passed down through generations. Sometimes the cruelty of youth didn't die with the years. It festered, poisoning the land and twisting souls into shadows. One night, when the moon hung low and the wind whispered through cracked silos like ghosts talking behind your back, Jimmy decided to stay outside, not hiding in the control room. He lit a cigarette even though he hated the taste, and waited. When the clock hit 3:17, she appeared again, standing at the foot of the grain chute, pale and trembling like a broken doll. Jimmy swallowed the lump in his throat and stepped forward. "I'm sorry," he said, voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm sorry they did that to you." Her eyes flickered, eyes that held the weight of 1,000 silent screams. Then she screamed. This time, it was different. It was pain and sorrow and rage all at once. It tore through the air like a hurricane. The rats came in waves, flooding from every crack, but Jimmy didn't run. He stood and listened, tears running down his cheeks, until the scream broke into a soft, desperate plea. "Help me!" Jimmy knew then that the girl wasn't just a ghost. She was a voice for all the forgotten pain buried in that place. She was a warning, a scar on the land and on the souls who ignored it. He stayed by the silos until dawn, holding her silent hand, promising to remember, promising to carry the weight of her story, because some screams don't end with death, they scream to be heard. And in Amarillo, at the grain elevator, at exactly 3:17 a.m., Susan Lee was still screaming between the silos. They say the Texas Hill Country is a place where the land breathes with secrets, where the limestone cliffs hold stories carved by time, and the dense woods whisper old warnings no one listens to anymore. The kind of place where you can drive for miles and suddenly feel like you've stepped off the map into something older than any road or town. The Millers didn't know that when they stopped one sunny afternoon to picnic in a hidden clearing. It was supposed to be a family day, laughing kids, sandwiches packed in a cooler, the kind of day that makes you forget the worries back home in Junction. The spot was a small hollow surrounded by tall oaks and cedars, the grass thick and green like it had never been trampled before. Even the air smelled different, richer, almost alive. Their daughter Emma was 7 and curious, a wild thing with tangled hair and bright eyes. She ran into the trees to chase a butterfly, promising she'd be right back. But she wasn't. Minutes stretched into an hour. The sun dipped lower and Emma didn't return. The trees grew darker, shadows folding in like fingers. Mr. Miller shouted her name until his voice cracked. Mrs. Miller's hands shook as she pulled out her phone, but there was no signal. The kind of silence that presses on your ears settled over the hollow. Then, just as the last light began to fade, Emma appeared at the edge of the woods. She was walking slow, like a ghost, drifting back from some dark place. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were empty, like dark hollows with no spark of the girl they knew. "Emma?" her mother breathed, reaching out. The girl didn't answer. She didn't smile or run to her parents. She just stood there, looking through them. The Millers took her home, but something was wrong. Emma didn't speak for days. She ate without hunger, stared at walls as if seeing something invisible. At night, she'd whisper words in a voice not quite her own, words that chilled her parents' bones. Then the disappearances started. First, a boy from down the street, little Tommy Lane, vanished on his way home from school. Then Sarah Blake, another child from Junction, went missing after playing near the woods. Panic clawed at the town like a wild animal, but no one dared go deep into the trees. Wild animals began to show up too. Deer and raccoons, even a coyote found wandering on the roads, but they had no faces, just smooth, pale skin stretched tight over hollow sockets where eyes and noses should have been. Their empty gazes seemed to follow people as they passed, and sometimes the animals vanished into thin air, leaving behind only strange footprints that sank into the earth, like they led somewhere beneath the ground. The town whispered of changelings, of old hill country legends about things that trade lives, a hollow ancient evil that lives between the roots and rocks. They spoke of the hollow, a place beneath the trees where time twisted and twisted until the soul was torn free from flesh. Jimmy Miller, Emma's older brother, refused to believe the stories, but when he found her sitting outside on the porch one evening, rocking back and forth, he saw it plain. The hollow in her eyes wasn't just empty, it was hungry. One night, Jimmy followed her into the woods. The air grew colder, thicker, the trees crowding around like they were alive and watching. Deep in the hollow, he found a pit, a dark maw in the earth, oozing something black and wet, a smell of decay and old death. Emma stood at the edge, her face pale and stretched, eyes locked on the pit like it called her home. "You have to fight it," Jimmy whispered, stepping closer. Her head snapped up, and for a moment the old Emma flickered in her gaze, the scared little sister he remembered. But then the hollow took over, and she smiled a smile too wide, too sharp. The pit gurgled, and from its depths a voice echoed, not quite human, but older than the hills. "Trade, trade." Jimmy realized then that the hollow demanded its price, a soul for every soul taken, a hunger that could never be filled. And it was patient, waiting for more to wander into its grasp. He grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her back, breaking the spell. The woods seemed to scream around them as they ran, the pit collapsing behind them like it had never been. But Emma was never quite the same. She looked human, moved human, but inside, the hollow was waiting for her to return. And in the Texas Hill Country, the trees keep their secrets, and the hollow eyes watch from the shadows. They say death smells different in prison, sweeter somehow, like meat left too long in the sun and just starting to rot. It clings to the walls, to the uniforms, to the very bricks of the place, and nowhere does it cling stronger than at Huntsville. Built in 1849, the Walls Unit in Huntsville, Texas, is the oldest state prison still in operation. Folks around town don't talk about it much, but everyone knows someone who's done time there. Fathers, brothers, cousins. It squats like a red brick beast in the middle of the city, a monument to punishment and pain. But the inmates, they talk quietly, in whispers passed between bunks in the dead hours of night, when the guards are half asleep and the darkness feels thick enough to chew. They talk about them. The night dogs, they ain't normal dogs. Hell, they ain't dogs at all, not really. They look like it at first. Long bodies, black skin like boiled leather, no hair, and eyes red as road flares. But they move wrong, too fast, too quiet. They don't bark, don't growl, they laugh. Every man who's seen them swears the same thing. They only show up when death is close. You see the dogs? Someone's dying that night. And they never come for the good ones. The first time Ray Bones Cutler heard about the dogs, he'd just hit year 17 of a life sentence. Murder 2. He used to be someone out in Lubbock, a small-time enforcer for a meth crew. Hard fists, hard face, harder heart. But he wasn't tough anymore, just old, slow, and full of memories that wouldn't quit. He started keeping a notebook, just a spiral-bound one from the commissary. It was something to pass the time, he told himself, something to keep his hands busy. But truth was, Bones was scared. Scared of how many men had seen the dogs just before getting shanked in the yard or hanging themselves in the showers. The notebook started with names, just names and dates. Then came the sketches, rough, frantic drawings of long limbs, slavering jaws, red eyes glowing in the dark between cell bars. He didn't show them to anyone, not even his cellie. Until Unit J was where they sent the lifers they didn't want to deal with anymore. Bones got moved there after an inmate jumped off the third-tier catwalk and painted the floor with his insides. They needed to shuffle bodies. He got a new cell, new routine, and a window facing the yard. That's where he saw them. 3 of them crouched by the chain link fence like they'd melted out of the shadows. Skin stretched tight over bones. Red eyes flicking back and forth like headlights in fog. Their mouths hung open in grins that didn't belong on anything walking this earth. Bones backed away, heart slamming in his chest. He blinked. They were gone. The next day, one of the guards, Hollister, dropped dead in the mess hall. Heart attack, they said, but his body had bite marks, strange ones. Too far apart for human teeth, too deep for rats. Bones added another entry to the notebook. Then he locked it away beneath his mattress. But the dogs didn't stop coming. They showed up outside the infirmary. Outside, solitary. Once he saw one sitting on the roof of the chapel, staring down at him with dead red eyes while the preacher inside gave a sermon on repentance. Bones stopped sleeping, stopped eating too, except when he had to. His hands shook when he wrote. The notebook was almost full now, covered in tight handwriting, crude drawings, scratchy lines that looked more like veins or roots than anything real. Then one night, he woke up to a sound. Laughter, low, guttural, like bones clacking together in a sack of meat. He turned, and there they were. All 3, pressed against the bars of his cell, grinning. "Not me," Bones whispered. "I didn't kill that girl. I swear to God they didn't blink." He tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy, like something was pressing down on him. His heart thudded against his ribs. He felt hot breath against his cheek, wet, sour, and impossibly cold. Then one of them spoke, not aloud, not with words, but straight into his mind. "You carry it still." Her fear, her blood, her scream. Bones fell to the floor. When he woke, they were gone, but the notebook was open. The last page had a message scrawled in a hand that wasn't his. "We do not hunt the dying. We collect the rot, the lies." The debt that day, Bones confessed. Not just to the guards, not just to a priest. He talked for hours, spilling everything about that girl in Lubbock. How he'd held her down, how he'd lied on the stand, how he'd let someone else take the fall. There were tears, snot, shaking hands. They transferred him to suicide watch. He hung himself 2 days later. Bedsheet, standard issue. They found his body with a smile stretched across his face. Not a peaceful smile, a wide one, a torn one, like someone had pulled the corners of his mouth until the skin ripped. And beneath his mattress, the guards found the notebook. Every page was black, except one, a drawing of 3 dogs.